I never imagined my own flesh and blood could turn against me with such venom. But that's exactly what happened the night my son, Ethan, demanded I hand over $120. 000. I'm Evelyn, a widow who spent 30 years building a life for my two children, Ethan and Clara, after their father passed. I'm not rich, but I've saved enough to live comfortably, to keep the house we grew up in, the one filled with memories of scraped knees, late-night talks, and holiday dinners. That house, with its creaky floors and peeling paint, was our sanctuary. But to Ethan, it was just a means to an piggy bank he thought he could smash open when his life started spiraling. He was 32. My golden boy who once drew me pictures of sunflowers and promised to take care of me when I got old. Now, he stood in my dining room, his voice sharp as a blade, demanding money I'd worked my whole life to save. You owe me, Mom, he said, his eyes cold, unrecognizable. You're sitting on all that cash while I'm drowning. I tried to reason with him, to explain that the money was for emergencies, for the family, not for bailing him out of another reckless business venture. But he wouldn't hear it. He wanted it all. And when I said no, he walked out, vowing I'd regret it. I didn't know then how far he'd go to make me pay, or how his betrayal would unravel secrets that would shake our family to its core. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. Ethan had always been ambitious, chasing dreams bigger than our small town could hold. He'd moved to the city after college, full of ideas about startups and investments. I was proud, even when his plans fell through, one after another. I'd lent him money before small amounts to cover rent, to tide him over between jobs. But this time was different. He'd come back home after years of spotty phone calls, his charm replaced by a desperate edge. He said he'd found the deal of a lifetime, a tech startup that just needed one big push to make him millions. All he needed was $120. 000. A sum that would drain most of my savings. I asked for details, for a business plan, but he waved me off, saying I wouldn't understand. That stung. I'd raised him alone, balanced budgets, and kept the lights on through sheer will. I wasn't some naive old woman. I knew a bad bet when I saw one. When I refused, his face darkened, and he accused me of holding him back, of choosing money over my own son. Clara, my daughter, was there too, quiet in the corner, her eyes darting between us. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was torn. Ethan stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan didn't call. I tried reaching out, but my texts went unanswered, my voicemails ignored. Clara told me he'd moved in with a friend in the city, that he was fine but didn't want to talk. I felt a hollowness in my chest, a mother's ache for a child who'd turned his back on her. Then the rumors started. Neighbors whispered about Ethan telling people I'd hoarded money, that I'd refused to help him when he was desperate. He painted me as selfish, greedy, a woman who'd let her son suffer rather than part with her precious savings. The lies spread like wildfire, and soon, old friends stopped calling. My sister, Margaret, even asked if it was true, her voice laced with doubt. I was humiliated, but worse, I was angry. Ethan wasn't just cutting me out of his life. He was tearing down everything I'd built, everything I was. I lay awake at night, replaying that fight, wondering if I'd been too harsh, if I should have given him the money just to keep the peace. But something in me hardened. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. If he wanted a war, I'd fight back, but not with lies or spite. I'd do it my way, with truth and patience, even if it broke my heart. I started digging. Ethan had always been secretive about his business deals, but I wasn't clueless. I called in favors from old friends, people who knew the city's business scene. I wanted to know what he was really up to, why he needed that money so badly. What I found made my blood run cold. Ethan hadn't been honest about the startup. It wasn't some golden opportunity. It was a scam, a shady operation run by a man named Victor Kane, a con artist with a rap sheet longer than my arm. Ethan wasn't just a victim. He was in deep, promising investors money he didn't have, using my name as collateral. He'd told people I'd back him, that my savings were his to leverage. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. My own son was gambling with my reputation, my future, all for a quick buck. I wanted to confront him, to shake him until he saw sense. But I knew that wouldn't work. Ethan was too far gone, blinded by greed or desperation or both. I had to be smarter, to protect myself and Clara, who was still caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to her brother and love for me. Clara was my rock, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She'd always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over arguments and kept us together. Now, she was stuck, trying to defend Ethan while grappling with his lies. One night, she came over, her face pale, and told me she'd overheard Ethan talking to Victor. They were planning to pressure me again, this time with a lawsuit, claiming I'd promised him the money years ago. It was a lie, but Victor was good at twisting the truth, and Ethan was desperate enough to go along. I felt a surge of rage, but also a strange clarity. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, about who controlled our family's story. I wasn't going to let Ethan and some sleazy con man rewrite my life. I told Clara we needed to act, not out of vengeance, but to save what was left of us. She hesitated, her loyalty to Ethan wavering, but she nodded. We were in this together now, and I knew what I had to do. I'd expose Ethan's lies, not to destroy him, but to bring him back to me, to the family we used to be. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence. My dining room table buried under stacks of emails, bank statements, and scribbled notes. I wasn't a detective, but I was a mother, and that gave me a kind of stubbornness no one could match. I tracked down Victor's old business partners, men and women he'd swindled, and they were more than happy to talk. Their stories were eerily similar, promises of quick wealth, forged documents, and then nothing but excuses when the money vanished. Victor was a predator, and Ethan was his latest prey or worse, his accomplice. The thought made my stomach churn. I kept imagining Ethan as a boy, his gap-toothed smile as he handed me a dandelion, saying it was a magic flower. How had that boy become this man, so willing to betray his own mother? I didn't have answers, but I had determination. I wasn't going to let Victor and Ethan drag our family into ruin. I started building a case, piece by piece, to prove Ethan was being manipulated, to show him the truth before it was too late. Clara helped where she could, though I could tell it was tearing her apart. She'd always looked up to Ethan, her big brother who'd carried her on his shoulders and taught her how to ride a bike. Now, she was seeing him in a new light, and it hurt her as much as it hurt me. One evening, she brought over a USB drive, her hands trembling as she handed it to me. I found this in Ethan's old laptop. She whispered, I didn't want to believe it. But you need to see it. The drive contained emails between Ethan and Victor, detailing their plan to use my savings as leverage for a loan. They'd even drafted a fake contract with my signature, claiming I'd agreed to fund their venture. My heart sank as I read the words, each one a fresh wound. Ethan wasn't just desperate. He was complicit, willing to forge my name to get what he wanted. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for weakness. I hugged Clara, thanking her for her courage, and promised her we'd fix this together. But inside, I was terrified. What if Ethan was too far gone to save? I decided to confront Victor first. If I could dismantle his hold over Ethan, maybe I could reach my son. I found Victor's office in a sleek high-rise, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to our modest home. I dressed carefully that day, in a navy blazer and my best pearls, wanting to look like someone who couldn't be intimidated. Victor was exactly as I'd imagined, slick, charming, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He invited me in, offering coffee like we were old friends. But I cut through his pleasantries. I know what you're doing to my son, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. And I'm going to stop you. He laughed, leaning back in his chair, but I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. I laid out what I knew his past scams, the forged contract, the lies he'd fed Ethan. I told him I'd go to the police, to the press, to anyone who'd listen. For a moment, he was silent. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. You're a tough lady, Evelyn. But Ethan's in too deep. You turn on me. You turn on him. It was a threat, but it only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my family. When I got home, I found Clara waiting, her face pale. She'd heard from Ethan and was furious, claiming I'd gone behind his back to ruin his life. He'd called her, ranting about how I was selfish, how I'd never supported his dreams. Clara was shaken, but she stood by me, her voice quiet but firm. He's wrong, Mom. I know he is. We sat together that night, going through the evidence again, piecing together a plan. I didn't want to destroy Ethan, but I needed to protect us. I decided to meet him, to lay everything bare and give him a chance to come clean. I sent him a text, asking him to come to the house, to talk like we used to. He didn't respond, but I held on to hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could reach the boy I'd raised, the one who'd once loved me enough to draw sunflowers. I set the table for dinner, like I had 1,000 times before, hoping it would remind him of home, of us. The night Ethan came over, the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. He walked in, his shoulders tense, his eyes avoiding mine. Clara was there too, sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. I'd prepared his favorite meal, lasagna, hoping the familiar smell might soften him. But he didn't touch the food. Instead, he launched into a tirade, accusing me of betraying him, of siding with strangers over my own son. I let him talk, let his anger spill out, until he was breathless. Then I spoke, my voice calm but firm. I told him about Victor's scams, the forged contract, the lies he'd been fed. I showed him the emails, the proof that Victor was using him. Ethan's face went pale, but he shook his head, refusing to believe it. You're lying, he said, his voice breaking. You just don't want me to succeed. I reached for his hand, But he pulled away, storming out again, leaving the lasagna untouched and my heart in pieces. Clara hugged me as I cried, promising we'd find a way. But I wasn't so sure anymore. The days after Ethan's visit were a blur of sleepless nights and endless worry. I kept replaying his words, the way his eyes had hardened when he called me a liar. I'd always thought love could fix anything, that a mother's heart could mend any rift. But now I wasn't so sure. Ethan was slipping away, and I felt powerless to stop it. Clara, bless her, refused to give up. She spent hours online, digging deeper into Victor's past, finding more victims willing to talk. She even tracked down a lawyer, a kind woman named Sarah who specialized in fraud cases. Sarah listened to our story, her face grim as she reviewed the evidence. "You've got a strong case," she said. "But going after Victor means exposing Ethan's role. Are you prepared for that?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to save my son, not destroy him. But every step I took seemed to pull him further into the mess. Still, I nodded. I had to protect Clara, the house, our future. If that meant dragging Ethan through the mud, so be it. Sarah helped us file a formal complaint with the police, detailing Victor's scams and Ethan's involvement. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, putting my son's name in a legal document like he was a criminal. But I told myself it was for his own good, a wake-up call to pull him out of Victor's grip. The police moved quickly, raiding Victor's office and seizing his computers. Word spread fast, and soon, Ethan called me, his voice shaking with rage. "You've ruined everything, Mom," he shouted. "They're coming for me now, because of you." I tried to explain, to tell him I was trying to save him, but he hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, feeling like I'd lost him for good. Clara found me like that, tears streaming down my face, and she wrapped her arms around me. "He'll come around, Mom," she whispered. "He has to." But I could hear the doubt in her voice, and it mirrored my own. The investigation dragged on, and the town buzzed with gossip. People I'd known for years looked at me differently, their pity tinged with judgment. I heard whispers at the grocery store, saw heads turn when I walked into church. She turned on her own son, they said, as if I'd had a choice. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them I was fighting for Ethan, not against him. But I kept my head down. I had to stay strong for Clara, who was carrying her own guilt for helping me. She'd stopped sleeping, her eyes shadowed with worry. One night, she broke down, sobbing as she admitted she felt responsible for Ethan's pain. I should have talked to him more, made him listen, she said. I held her, telling her it wasn't her fault, that Ethan had made his own choices. But deep down, I wondered if I'd pushed too hard, if I'd misjudged how far he'd fallen. Then came the breakthrough. Sarah called with news. Victor had been arrested, charged with multiple counts of fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was turning on his partners to save himself. Ethan's name came up, but Sarah assured me he wasn't the main target. He's a small fish, she said. If he cooperates, he might walk away with a slap on the wrist. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. Ethan still wasn't talking to me, and now he was facing legal trouble. I knew I had to see him, to make him understand I wasn't his enemy. I tracked him down to a rundown apartment in the city, a far cry from the flashy life he'd been chasing. When he opened the door, he looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled. What do you want? He snapped, but I pushed past him, refusing to let him shut me out again. I told him everything: Victor's arrest, the evidence, the chance for him to come clean. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. I reached for him, my voice soft. Ethan, I love you. I've always loved you. But you have to stop this. You have to choose us or him. He didn't answer, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, a glimmer of the boy I'd raised. I left him there, praying he'd make the right choice, but knowing it was out of my hands. When I got home, Clara was waiting, her face anxious. I told her what happened, and we sat together in silence, the weight of our fractured family pressing down on us. I didn't know if Ethan would come back to us, but I knew I'd done everything I could. I'd fought for him, not with anger or revenge, but with love, with truth. Now, it was up to him to decide who he wanted to be. The waiting was the hardest part. Days stretched into weeks, and Ethan remained a ghost in my life, his silence louder than any argument we'd ever had. I kept busy, tending to the garden, cooking meals for Clara, trying to hold on to the routines that had always grounded me. But every creak of the floorboards, every ring of the phone, made my heart leap, hoping it was him. Clara stayed close, her presence a quiet comfort, but I could see the toll this was taking on her. She'd stopped talking about her own life, her job, her friends, as if she couldn't bear to add to my burdens. I wanted to tell her to live, to not let Ethan's choices define her, but I didn't have the strength. We were both holding our breath, waiting for the storm to break. And then, one gray morning, it did. A letter arrived from Ethan, handwritten, the first real contact in months. My hands trembled as I opened it, Clara hovering at my shoulder, her eyes wide with hope and fear. The letter was short, but every word hit like a hammer. Ethan admitted he'd been wrong, that Victor had manipulated him, promising riches that never materialized. He wrote about his shame, how he'd let greed blind him to what mattered. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom, he wrote, but I did, and I don't know how to fix it. He said he was cooperating with the police, giving them everything he knew about Victor's schemes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. Not yet. But he wanted to see me, to talk. Tears blurred my vision as I read, and Clara hugged me, her own eyes wet. He's trying, Mom, she said. That's something. I nodded. But inside, I was torn. I wanted to run to him, to hold him like I did when he was small. But I also felt the weight of his betrayal, the lies he'd spread, the pain he'd caused. Could I trust him again? Did I even have a choice? I agreed to meet Ethan at a small cafe in town, a neutral place where we could talk without the ghosts of our house looming over us. When I saw him, my heart ached. He looked thinner, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes held a spark of the boy I remembered. We sat across from each other, the air thick with unspoken words. He started to apologize, his voice low, but I stopped him. I don't want apologies, I said. I want to understand. Why? Ethan, why did you do this? He looked down, his hands twisting in his lap, and then he told me everything. How Victor had filled his head with dreams of wealth, how he'd felt trapped by his failures, how he'd convinced himself that taking my money was his only way out. He didn't excuse himself, didn't blame me, just laid it all bare. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing my son, not the stranger he'd become. I reached across the table, took his hand, and told him I loved him. But I also told him he had work to do, not just with the police, but with us, with himself. Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening. He promised to try, to make things right. I wanted to believe him, but I'd been burned before. Still, I invited him home for dinner, a small step toward rebuilding what we'd lost. Clara was there, her smile tentative but warm. And for a moment, it felt like old times, three of us around the table, sharing a meal, laughing over small things. But the cracks were still there, hidden beneath the surface. Ethan was trying, but trust is a fragile thing, and we were all still learning how to mend it. Over the next few weeks, he started coming by more often, helping with chores, talking about his plans to start over. He wasn't chasing quick riches anymore. He was looking for a job, something steady. I saw glimpses of the man I'd hoped he'd become, but I couldn't shake the fear that it wouldn't last. That Victor's shadow still lingered. One night, as we sat on the porch, Ethan opened up about the guilt he carried. "I didn't just hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hurt Clara, too. I made her choose sides." I looked at him, seeing the weight he carried, and I realized something. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about redemption, about giving him a chance to be better. I told him that. Told him that family isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up, even when it's hard. He nodded, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for him, but for all of us. We were still broken, but maybe, just maybe, we could piece ourselves back together. The road to healing was uneven, paved with small victories and quiet setbacks. Ethan started working with Sarah, our lawyer, to clear his name, providing testimony against Victor that helped seal the con man's fate. Victor's trial was a spectacle, splashed across local news, his charm crumbling under the weight of evidence. Ethan's role came up, but Sarah was a small fish, and his cooperation earned him leniency. He walked away with probation, a second chance he didn't take lightly. I watched him closely in those days, searching for signs of the old Ethan, the one who'd let ambition blind him. But he seemed different, humbler, as if the weight of his mistakes had finally sunk in. He started working at a local hardware store, a far cry from the high-flying dreams he'd once chased. He didn't complain, didn't talk about shortcuts. He just showed up, day after day, and that gave me hope. Clara, too, was finding her way. She'd been so focused on fixing our family that she'd put her own life on hold. I encouraged her to reconnect with her friends, to pick up the art classes she'd loved but abandoned. One evening, she brought over a canvas she'd painted, a vibrant scene of our backyard, the garden bursting with color. "It's for you," she said, her smile shy. I hung it in the living room, right where the old family photos used to be, a symbol of new beginnings. But even as we rebuilt, the past lingered. Ethan's betrayal had left scars, not just on me, but on Clara, on our neighbors, on the trust we'd once taken for granted. People still whispered, and I caught their glances at church, their hushed tones when I passed. I held my head high, but it hurt, knowing my son's actions had painted me as the villain in their eyes. Ethan noticed, too. One Sunday, he insisted on coming to church with me, something he hadn't done in years. He sat beside me, his head bowed during the sermon, And afterward, he stood up and asked to speak. The congregation went quiet, their eyes fixed on him. He didn't shy away, didn't make excuses. He admitted his mistakes, his lies, the pain he'd caused. He apologized, not just to me, but to everyone. His voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. I watched, my heart swelling with pride and pain, as people nodded, some reaching out to shake his hand. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. When we got home, Ethan hugged me. A real hug. The kind he hadn't given me since he was a boy. "I'm going to make this right, Mom," he said. I believed him. Not because I was naive, but because I saw the effort. The slow, steady work of a man trying to rebuild himself. Clara and Ethan started spending more time together, too, rebuilding their own bond. I'd catch them talking late into the night, laughing over old memories, or arguing about nothing, the way siblings do. It reminded me of simpler times, when our biggest worry was who'd get the last slice of pie. But we weren't those people anymore. We'd been through too much, seen too much of each other's flaws. And yet, that made the moments we shared now even sweeter, like flowers growing through cracks in concrete. I started to see my role in all this, too, not just as the victim, but as someone who'd held on to control too tightly. I'd refused Ethan the money. Yes, but I hadn't listened, hadn't tried to understand his desperation. I vowed to do better, to be a mother who asked questions, who trusted but also guided. One evening, as the three of us sat around the table, Ethan brought up the house. "I know it's important to you, Mom," he said. "I shouldn't have tried to take it from you." It was the first time he'd acknowledged the deeper wound. The way his demand for money had felt like an attack on our home, our memories. I told him it wasn't about the money. Never had been. It was about family, about the promises we make to each other. He nodded, and for the first time, I felt like he understood. We weren't whole yet, but we were getting there, one honest conversation at a time. The night ended with laughter, with Clara teasing Ethan about his terrible cooking, and me feeling, for the first time in months, that we might just be okay. As spring turned to summer, our family found a fragile rhythm. Ethan kept his job at the hardware store, earning enough to move into a small apartment nearby. He'd come over most evenings, helping with dishes or fixing the leaky faucet I'd ignored for years. These were small gestures, but they meant the world to me. Proof that he was trying to rebuild not just his life, but our bond. Clara, too, was blossoming, her art classes giving her a spark I hadn't seen in years. She started talking about opening a small gallery, a dream she'd tucked away when Ethan's drama consumed us. I encouraged her, promising to help however I could, even if it meant dipping into my savings, the same savings I'd fought so hard to protect. It felt right, like a way to heal the wounds we'd all carried. But even as we moved forward, the past wasn't done with us. Victor's trial was approaching, and Ethan would have to testify, a reminder of the mess he'd been part of. I worried about how the trial would affect Ethan. He was stronger now, but I could see the anxiety in his eyes whenever Sarah called with updates. She'd warned us that Victor's lawyers were ruthless, that they'd try to pin more blame on Ethan to save their client. I wanted to shield him, to take his place on the stand. But I knew this was his fight. All I could do was be there, to remind him he wasn't alone. The night before his testimony, we sat on the porch, the air warm with the scent of blooming jasmine. Ethan was quiet, his hands fidgeting with a loose thread on his shirt. "I'm scared, Mom," he admitted. "What if they don't believe me? What if I mess this up?" I took his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm, and told him the truth had a way of shining through, even when it was hard. I told him I was proud of him, not for being perfect, but for facing his mistakes. He looked at me, his eyes soft, and for a moment, I saw my little boy again, the one who'd believed I could fix anything. The trial was grueling. Victor sat at the defense table, his charm replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Ethan took the stand, his voice steady as he recounted how Victor had lured him in, promising wealth and status. He didn't shy away from his own role, admitting he'd ignored the red flags, driven by his own desperation. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding, as Victor's lawyer tried to tear him apart, painting him as a greedy opportunist. But Ethan held his ground, his honesty raw and undeniable. When he stepped down, he looked at me, and I gave him a small nod, my eyes brimming with tears. The jury didn't take long to convict Victor, sentencing him to years behind bars. Ethan's testimony had been a turning point, and though he'd escaped jail, he carried the weight of his choices. As we left the courthouse, he hugged me, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I held him tight, knowing we'd both paid a price, but we'd come through it together. Back home, life settled into something resembling normal. Ethan started joining us for Sunday dinners, his laughter filling the house again. Clara's gallery idea took shape, and she asked Ethan to help with the business side, a small but meaningful step toward their reconciliation. I watched them, my heart full but cautious. We'd rebuilt so much, but trust is a slow-growing thing, and I knew we weren't done yet. One evening, Ethan brought up the $120. 000 again, not with anger, but with regret. "I should have listened to you," he said. "You were trying to protect me, and I threw it in your face." I told him it wasn't about the money, but about the choices we make, the people we choose to be. He nodded, and I saw something new in his determination to be better, not just for me, but for himself. As summer faded, I started to feel the weight of my own role in our story. I'd fought for my family, but I'd also held on to control, afraid to let go. I realized I needed to trust Ethan, to let him make his own way, even if it meant more mistakes. I started sharing more with him and Clara, not just the burdens, but the dreams I'd tucked away, plans to travel, to see the world I'd only read about. They listened, their eyes bright, and for the first time, I felt like we were a team again, not just a mother and her children, but three people building a future together. The road ahead wasn't smooth, but it was ours, and that was enough. The seasons changed, and with them, our family found a new rhythm, delicate but growing stronger. Ethan's probation kept him tethered to routine weekly check-ins with his officer, steady hours at the hardware store. He didn't complain, and I noticed small changes in him, the way he listened when I spoke, the way he offered to mow the lawn without being asked. These were the acts of a man trying to prove himself, not just to me, but to the world he'd let down. Clara, meanwhile, poured her heart into her gallery, securing a small space in town with help from a loan I insisted on giving her. She protested at first, worried about taking money after everything with Ethan. But I told her this was different. This was for her dreams, not desperation. Watching her hang her paintings, her face glowing with pride, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Our family was healing, But the scars remained. A reminder of how close we'd come to losing each other. The town, too, was slowly warming to us again. Ethan's public apology at church had softened some hearts, and people started greeting me with smiles instead of whispers. But not everyone was ready to forget. Margaret, my sister, was one of them. She'd been distant since the rumors started. Her calls rare and clipped. I knew she believed Ethan's lies at first, and though she'd apologized, the rift lingered. One afternoon, she showed up unannounced, her face tight with emotion. "I should have trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. We talked for hours, unraveling the hurt, and I realized how much I'd missed her. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was necessary, not just for her, but for me. I invited her to Sunday dinner with Ethan and Clara, hoping to rebuild what we'd lost. She hesitated, then nodded, and I felt a flicker of hope that our family could expand again, not just in blood, but in trust. Ethan's journey wasn't without stumbles. One evening, he came over, his face clouded with frustration. He'd been offered a job in the city, a step up from the hardware store, but it meant working with people tied to Victor's old network. "It's not the same," he insisted, but I saw the temptation in his eyes, the pull of the life he'd once chased. I didn't yell or accuse. Instead, I asked him to think about what he wanted, not just for himself, but for us. He sat there, silent, then admitted he was scared of slipping back into old habits. "I don't want to be that person again," he said. I told him he didn't have to bet he had a choice every day to be better. He turned down the job, choosing stability over risk. And I knew then he was truly trying to change. It wasn't just about avoiding trouble. It was about building a life he could be proud of. Clara noticed the shift in Ethan, too. She started inviting him to help with the gallery, asking his advice on layouts or budgets. At first, he was hesitant, afraid of overstepping. But she insisted, saying, "You're my brother, not my boss. I want you here." Their bond grew stronger, forged in shared laughter and late-night talks about the future. I watched them, my heart full but cautious, knowing trust was a fragile thing. One night, as we sat around the table, Ethan brought up the idea of starting a small business together, a hardware supply for local contractors. Something steady, honest. Clara lit up, offering to handle the branding. And I saw a spark of the old Ethan, the one with dreams, but tempered now with humility. I offered to invest a small amount, not out of obligation, but because I believed in them, in us. That dinner felt like a turning point. Margaret was there, her laughter mingling with ours, and the house felt alive again, filled with voices and warmth. We talked about the future, not the past, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of Ethan's betrayal or the town's judgment. We were a family, flawed but fighting, and that was enough. As I cleared the dishes, Ethan stayed to help, his hands steady as he dried plates. And I realized something. This was redemption. Not in grand gestures, but in these quiet moments. In the choice to show up, to try again. We weren't perfect, but we were together. And that was more than I dared hope for. By fall, our family felt like it was breathing again. Each day a small step toward something stronger. Ethan and Clara's business idea took shape, with Ethan crunching numbers and Clara designing logos. Their excitement contagious. I helped where I could, offering advice from years of managing a household on a tight budget. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. And I saw pride in Ethan's eyes when he landed their first client, a local builder who'd known him as a kid. Clara's gallery opened to a small but enthusiastic crowd, her paintings drawing gasps and whispers of admiration. I stood in the back, watching my children work together, their laughter echoing over the hum of conversation. Margaret was there, too, her arm linked with mine, and I felt the weight of years of distance lifting. We were rebuilding, not just as a mother and her children, but as a family bound by choice, not just blood. The trial was behind us, but its shadow lingered. Ethan still carried guilt, though he didn't talk about it much. I saw it in the way he'd pause sometimes, staring out the window, as if replaying his mistakes. I didn't push him to talk. I'd learned that healing comes in its own time. Instead, I kept the house open, the table set, a place for him to come back to. One evening, he showed up with a bouquet of sunflowers, their bright petals a nod to the drawings he'd made as a boy. "I found these at the market," he said, his smile shy. I hugged him, the flowers pressed between us, and felt a knot in my chest loosen. He was trying, not just to make amends, but to be the son I'd always known he could be. Clara teased him about his sentimental side, but her eyes were soft, and I knew she felt it too, the slow mending of our family's heart. The town's judgment faded with time. People stopped whispering, started asking Ethan about his new business, even offering tips or contacts. He'd earned their respect, not with words, but with actions showing up, working hard, being honest. I saw the change in how they greeted him at the hardware store. Their nods no longer cautious, but warm. Margaret started coming to Sunday dinners regularly, bringing her famous pecan pie, and the house felt full again, alive with stories and laughter. But I knew better than to think we were done. Redemption isn't a destination. It's a journey, one we were all on together. Ethan stumbled sometimes, snapping when he was tired or withdrawing when doubt crept in. Clara and I learned to give him space, to trust he'd find his way back. And he did, every time, with a quiet apology or a helping hand, proving he was in this for good. One crisp October evening, Ethan suggested we take a trip together, just the three of us, to the coast. Like when we were kids, he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Clara lit up, remembering the sandy beaches and late-night bonfires. I hesitated, worried about leaving the house, the business. But they insisted, saying we needed this, needed each other. We booked a small cabin, nothing fancy, just a place to be together. The drive was filled with music and arguments over who'd pick the playlist, and I laughed until my sides ached. At the beach, we walked along the shore, the waves lapping at our feet, and Ethan told stories of our old trips, his voice light, unburdened. Clara sketched the horizon, her pencil flying over the page, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. We weren't running from the past. We were building on it, creating new memories to carry us forward. That night, as we sat around a bonfire, Ethan spoke up, his voice soft against the crackle of the flames. "I almost lost this," he said, looking at me. Then Clara. "I almost lost you both." He didn't need to say more. We understood. Clara reached for his hand, and I leaned against him, the warmth of the fire mingling with the warmth of us. Together, we stayed up late, talking about nothing and everything. And I realized this was what I'd fought for, not just a family, but a home, a place where we could be broken and whole. all at once. Winter brought new challenges, but we faced them together. Ethan and Clara's business hit a rough patch when a client backed out, leaving them scrambling to cover costs. I saw the old fear in Ethan's eyes, the temptation to chase quick fixes. But he didn't. Instead, he sat with Clara, poring over spreadsheets, finding ways to cut corners without cutting corners on integrity. I offered to help, dipping into my savings again, but they refused, insisting they'd figure it out. "We've got this, Mom," Clara said, her voice firm, and Ethan nodded, his jaw set. I was proud, not just of their determination, but of their partnership, the way they leaned on each other. By January, they'd landed 2 new clients, and the relief on their faces was worth more than any money I could have given. Margaret became a fixture in our lives again, her presence a bridge to the past we'd all missed. She started hosting game nights, pulling out dusty board games from our childhood, and Ethan's competitive streak had us laughing until midnight. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when old wounds reopened, when Ethan snapped at Clara over a scheduling mix-up, or when I caught myself bracing for another betrayal. We'd pause, take a breath, and talk it out, learning to trust each other's intentions. I started sharing more of my own dreams, too, telling them about my wish to see Paris, to walk streets I'd only seen in books. Ethan grinned, saying he'd save up to take me one day, and Clara promised to paint the Eiffel Tower for me. It was a small moment, but it felt like a promise, a future we were all building. The town had mostly moved on, but some scars lingered. A few old friends still kept their distance, their trust harder to rebuild. Ethan didn't let it stop him. He volunteered at the community center, teaching kids about woodworking, sharing the skills he'd picked up at the store. People noticed, their nods turning to smiles, their conversations warmer. Clara's gallery became a local hub, drawing crowds who saw her talent and Ethan's quiet support. I watched them, my heart full but cautious, knowing life wasn't a straight line. There'd be more stumbles, more doubts, but we'd learn how to catch each other, how to keep going. One snowy evening, Ethan showed up with a gift photo album filled with pictures from our beach trip, mixed with old snapshots from their childhood. "I found these in the attic," he said, his voice soft. We sat together, flipping through memories, Ethan's gap-toothed grin, Clara's paint-smudged hands, the 3 of us at a county fair. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. We'd come so far, not by erasing the past, but by facing it. Ethan apologized again, quieter this time, and I told him he didn't need to keep saying it. "You're here," I said. "That's enough." Clara squeezed his hand, and we sat there, the snow falling outside, the warmth of our home holding us together. As the year ended, I felt a shift in myself. I'd spent so long fighting for my savings, my reputation, my family, that I'd forgotten how to rest. But now, with Ethan and Clara beside me, I could breathe. We weren't perfect, but we were honest, and that was more than I'd dared hope for. The house, once a battleground, was a home again, filled with laughter, arguments, and love. I knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. We'd face the worst and come out stronger, not because we were flawless, but because we chose each other, every single day. The new year dawned cold and bright, a fresh page for our family. Ethan and Clara's business steadied, their client list growing as word spread of their reliability. Ethan took on more responsibility, handling contracts with a care I hadn't seen in him before. Clara's gallery became a local gem, her art featured in a regional magazine, and she started teaching classes, her confidence blooming. I watched them, my children, not as the kids I'd raised, but as adults carving their own paths. Margaret was there, too, her laughter a constant now, her pecan pie a staple at our table. The house felt alive, its creaky floors and peeling paint no longer burdens, but badges of survival. We'd fought for this, all of us, and every moment together was a victory. Ethan's probation ended in February, a quiet milestone we celebrated with takeout and bad movies, the kind we'd watched when they were young. He didn't talk much about the past, but I saw it in his eyes sometimes, the weight of what he'd almost lost. He'd started therapy, something he'd resisted at first, but now he said it helped, gave him tools to navigate the doubts that crept in. Clara, too, was finding her balance, her art a way to process the chaos we'd lived through. She painted a portrait of us, Ethan, her, and me standing in the garden, our faces soft, hopeful. This is us now, she said, hanging it in the living room. I looked at it every day, a reminder of what we'd rebuilt. Not perfect, but ours. The town had fully embraced us again. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, invitations to barbecues, their trust restored by Ethan's steady presence and Clara's warmth. Even the ones who'd whispered about me years ago now asked about my garden, my plans, as if the past was just a story we'd all outgrown. I started planning my Paris trip. Not just a dream now, but a real possibility, with Ethan and Clara promising to join me. We'll make it a family adventure, Ethan said, his grin wide. And I believed him. We were dreaming together now, not as individuals chasing separate goals, but as a unit, stronger for it. One spring evening, as we sat on the porch, Ethan spoke up, his voice steady. I was wrong about a lot, he said, looking at me, then Clara. But the worst was thinking I could do this without you. He didn't apologize again. He didn't need to. His life, his choices. His presence said it all. Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. We'd been through betrayal, lies, and loss, but we'd come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. I reached for their hands. The three of us linked, and I knew this was redemption, not a single moment, but a lifetime of showing up, of choosing love over pride. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I thought about the $120. 000. The fight that had nearly broken us. It wasn't about the money. Never had been. It was about trust. About family. About the choices we make when the stakes are high. Ethan had chosen wrong once, but he'd chosen right every day since. And that was what mattered. Clara's laughter broke my thoughts, her voice teasing Ethan about his sunburn from the beach trip. I smiled, my heart full, knowing we'd shocked everyone, not with revenge or drama, but with resilience, with love. We were a family, not defined by our worst moments, but by the ones we built after, together, one day at a time.